Hello, my name is Teresa Martínez Quiles, and I'm from the University of Alicante. In today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about a South African female writer named Sindiwe Magona and her very famous novel, Mother to Mother, which was published in 1998. The title of my paper reads, My Sister Mother, We Are Bound in This Sorrow, Bonding Through Shared Maternal Grief in Sindiwe Magona's Mother to Mother. Sindiwe Magona's novel Mother to Mother narrates the story of a grief-stricken South African black mother named Mandisa who reaches out through correspondence to the mother of the white girl that was murdered by the protagonist's son. Based on the real-life tragic death of Amy Beale, a white American young woman who was killed by a mob of black youth in South Africa in 1993, the novel is set during a particularly tumultuous time when apartheid had only been recently outlawed. Magona's novel may thus be considered as part of the literary canon that sought to respond to the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, an institutional process that aimed at reconciling the country following years of racial segregation and the structural oppression of Black people. Before I continue with the analysis of Magona's novel, I do want to note that this paper forms part of a larger research project named Reconfem, the long title of which reads Spaces of Reconciliation, Post-Conflict Interventions in Anglophone Women's Writing. This project aims to foreground the responses of women writers to the policies and debates involved in reconciliation, and to shed light on the complexities of post-conflict situations from a feminine perspective. In this case, I have decided to focus on the author Sindiwe Magona, one of the many South African women who have used her fiction to shed light on some of the aspects that were ignored by the South African TRC, including the suffering that Black women specifically experienced within apartheid. Going back to my analysis of the novel, my argument is that Magona's novel Mother to Mother effectively challenges the traditional male-centered premise that emotion is a primarily private affair by presenting maternal grief as a significant political mechanism that may contribute to the restoration of interpersonal relations in post-apartheid South Africa. More specifically, I argue that the novel presents maternal grief as a potential bonding vehicle that may motivate cross-racial empathy between South Africans. The notion that emotion is a significant political mechanism has a long-standing history in feminist scholarship. Whereas affect theories such as Sarah Ahmed have focused on the ways in which emotions circulate among individuals via societal standards and norms, as opposed to the traditional idea that emotions are private affairs that rise within the individual. Others, such as Judith Butler, have underscored how certain emotions, in this case grief, may constitute potential vehicles of bonding and thus of political change. In her work Precarious Life, for instance, Butler describes grief as a process through which we come to realize our interdependence as human beings and our ethical obligations to others. When a loved one dies, for instance, a situation that Butler philosophically describes as a dispossession of the self, it is not just that we lose a loved one, but that we lose a relationship, a part of ourself that was invoked and nurtured by said person. Butler also maintains that this interdependence extends to all human beings, not just our loved ones, and that our capacity to be nurtured by others simultaneously means that we're prone to being harmed, hence the need to establish social rules for the sake of coexistence. Butler's view is that grief has significant political potential because when we grieve, we are reminded of how vulnerable we are and how much we need others, which may be a good starting point for the development of more ethical and compassionate societies. Other authors, such as Irid Kanan, have spoken out about how the sharing of parental grief may help with peace-building processes. After conducting a series of interviews to individuals involved in Israeli-Palestinian groups, Kanan found that some parents, especially mothers, were able to empathize with those in the other side of the political struggle through the sharing of stories about the loss of their children. Kanan concludes in her work that the act of collective mourning may provide a valuable ethical guide that disrupts the binary categorization of victims and perpetrators by acknowledging that it is compatible to mourn the suffering of one side while also taking responsibility for the pain inflicted on the other side. These ideas are exemplified in Magona's novel. Manisa's letters record both her empathy for the other mother's pain upon discovering the murder of her daughter, and Manisa's own suffering over the loss of her son to the racist justice system in South Africa. Furthermore, beyond the mere attempt to seek the forgiveness of the other mother, Mandisa attempts to explain the reasons that have led her son to becoming a murderer. A tragic series of events that are undoubtedly representative of the systemic oppression that Blacks have historically suffered under apartheid. Through the narration of Mandisa's and her son's traumatic stories, Magona successfully depicts how the violence inflicted upon Black people through apartheid was not just a physical thing, but also a bureaucratic event, as made evident through the dispossession of the land, for instance. Throughout her narration, Mandisa also sheds light on the difficult position that she has been forced to inhabit as the mother of a Black murderer. Not only is she left with the grief for her lost child and the life that he could have had if things had been different, but she is also considered by many to be the cause of her child's tragic demise. In line with the discourse of Sarah Rudick, who speaks about the possibilities of using maternal love as a paradigm for the structuring of governments and societies, mothers are generally held accountable for their actions of their sons and daughters to a greater extent than fathers. As Mandisa explains, people look at her as though she's the one who ordered her son to murder that white girl. No sympathy is afforded to the mother of the beast or the mother of the serpent, a position that is as inevitable for Mandisa as the one inhabited by the murdered girl's mother. By recalling this in her letters, Mandisa is actively seeking the other mother's understanding and empathy. Having said that, it should be noted that at no moment does Mandisa wish to completely equate her grief to that of the girl's mother. Other critics have expressed concern over this specific issue. According to Anne Whitehead, by having Mandisa address the other woman as a mother, the novel takes the risk of reinforcing the misconceived notion of gender identification, which might detract from the women's racial differences. Similarly, Meg Samuelson talks about the sentimentalization of maternal identity through the use of expressions such as sister mother, which Mandisa uses in her letters to address the girl's mother. While there may be a certain sentimentality in the tone of these writings, there is no denying that there are specific points in the novel where Mandisa highlights the differences between the two women, which are no doubt rooted in the racial disparity. This is exemplified in one of Mandisa's last letters, which I am now going to read. I open quote, "My sister mother, we are bound in this sorrow. You, as I, have not chosen this coat that you wear. It is heavy on our shoulders, I should know. We were not asked whether we wanted it or not. We did not choose. We are the chosen. But you, remember this. Let it console you some. You never have to ask yourself, what did I not do for this child? You can carry your head sky high. You have no shame, no reason for shame, only the loss, irretrievable loss. Be consoled, however. Be consoled, for with your loss comes no shame, no deep sense of personal failure, only glory. Unwanted and unasked for, I know. But let this be your source of strength, your fountain of hope, the light that illuminates the depth of your despair." End of quote. As it may be observed, there are two parts to this letter. In the first paragraph, Mandisa clearly strives to make a connection with the other mother, alluding to their shared sense of grief and the involuntary nature of their suffering. This collective expression of sorrow, which is encapsulated through the effective term "my sister mother," evokes Butler's notion of grief as a binding force that reveals our interconnectedness and mutual vulnerability, in this case to the pain of losing one's children. Maternal love is thus inextricably connected to maternal grief, and that feeling is something that both women can relate to. However, Following this expression of connection between them, Mandisa establishes a clear difference in the way that the respective grief manifests itself. The main distinction between their experiences is that Mandisa, unlike the other mother, is also forced to deal with an ongoing shame. At this moment, Mandisa is using this difference to offer some consolation to the murdered girl's mother, who at least can publicly murder her daughter without being scorned. The presence of shame in the Mandisa's grief is clearly connected to her own specific experience as a black mother. As Whitehead claims, the novel sheds light on the particular sadness that black mothers suffered under apartheid, as they were forced to constantly leave their own home and their children while they acted as the primary caregivers for white families. Magona's novel reflects as well. There are many references to the guilt that Mandisa has felt her entire life for not having been able to be more present in her children's life because of the exploitative nature of her domestic work, which adds yet another layer to the protagonist's pain upon being labeled as the cause for her son's actions. From my perspective, the narration of Mandisa's particular sadness, an experience that is undoubtedly symbolic of Black South African motherhood, suggests that, in line with Elizabeth Porter's work, the best way to reconcile the opposite sides in a conflict situation is through the building of personal relationships, which must necessarily be rooted in the humanization of the other. By exposing the details of her personal grief and sorrow, Mandisa is enabling the empathetic process, opening the door for a potential future encounter, which the novel never describes, as the protagonist's letters remain unanswered. Interestingly enough, Magona's choice to leave the ending open challenges the narrative trend that was prevalent in the 1990s in the fiction of other female South African writers, especially white women. According to Elke Boimer, these novels displayed a marked nervousness about interdeterminacy and instead focused on securing a closed ending that would explicitly endorse unity among South Africans. In conclusion, Mother to Mother reflects on the potentiality of maternal grief as a vehicle for cross-racial empathy in the process of reconciliation in South Africa, and it suggests that one of the conditions that should be met is the acknowledgement of pain and vulnerability experienced of both sides. Mandisa's letters interrogate the binary categorization of victims and perpetrators and showcase how the collective expression of grief caused by the loss of one's children, particularly from the mother's perspective, might be able to transgress racial divides. Despite the differences explored between Mandisa and the other woman, which is undoubtedly necessary for the grounding of a potential future reconciliation, the novel suggests that, in line with Butler's work, there are particular emotions that arise throughout the process of mourning that are common across racial lines. Such emotions may be encapsulated as a feeling of vulnerability and interdependence that is inherent to all humans, and which becomes especially heightened when it comes to the loss of a child. Even though the novel's ending does not clarify whether the girl's mother will reciprocate Mandisa's call for empathy, the connection between the two mothers is pre-established and might be read as a potential starting point for the process of interpersonal reconciliation and peace building in South Africa. With this, I finish my presentation. These are my works cited, and I look forward to any questions or comments that you may have regarding my presentation. Thank you.